Hello everyone, I am Shamfa Cudjoe, your Member of Parliament for Tobago West. And you know we are always trying to do our very best to keep our constituents well educated and well informed. So we have introduced to our lineup Face to Face, which is an educational series to keep our constituents informed. And I am here with Miss Glendora Lashley, who is our host and who is going to help me to bring the information to you. So thank you for tuning in and may you enjoy Face to Face.
We mentioned previously the fact that the committee is presenting for consideration that the name of the Chief Secretary be changed to Premier. For those of us in the region, Nevis has a Premier. You know, that's what their Chief Secretary is called, right? The current Premier is Mark Brantley. I follow him. He's quite active on social media. So it's not a new thing, all right? It's just the name change. And of course, explain to us why you all felt that we should move from Chief Secretary to Premier.
Well, because of the level of responsibility and the level of authority that the House of Assembly will have now, we felt it necessary to have a better title for the head of this Tobago Island government. From our experience over the years, Tobago being like an observer when you go to Caribbean Tourism Organization meetings, if we go to United Nations, you go to WTO, the Tobago representative could only be an observer. What this new legislation does is give the government the ability to transfer to the Tobago Island government the power to sit on the table with the necessary authority as the government to speak on Tobago matters and to conduct business on Tobago matters. So let's say we are dealing with a trade matter or tourism matter or something as it relates to international business. And the representative from Tobago House of Assembly or the Tobago Island government is going, he don't want to sit, the Chief Secretary don't want to sit around a table with prime ministers. He is Chief Secretary. And there are people who think that because the title is Secretary or Chief Secretary, it means that that person is actually sitting doing administrative work and they don't get the level of respect. Many people would have complained about that or brought that to my attention in the past. I remember being a part of Commonwealth Tourism of the Caribbean Tourism Organization, and there is a difference in the respect a secretary gets or compared to a minister or a chief secretary sitting around the table of prime ministers of the Caribbean. You want him to carry or her to carry that level of authority.
Right. When they hear the term, you automatically think what it means, and that's understandable.
It's not somebody sitting down doing administrative or secretarial work. People picture that in their mind.
Correct. That's understandable. It's not something that is new. It's practice in other industries where people change the names, the titles, because of the nature of what is happening and to make it, I suppose, more easily identifiable as a very senior position. So that is that, and the people will consider that, and they will decide, if they're okay with that or not.
That's right.
If we go a little further into the bill now, for the people who have not followed this thing, the link is available on the MP's page.
On the MP's page, or you could go directly to the Parliament website, www.ttparliament.org. Yeah, and you would see it's on the left-hand side. You could click on it. It's called My Opinion Counts. And you would see a copy of the bill. You could see the link to a copy of the bill and the link to the survey.
Right. And we're just going to go through a few of them, just so you get a better understanding as to what's happening here. Not many of us like to read, and the JSC has given us quite a lot of reading to do. So the first question with respect to, not the first question, question 5, and that one speaks to Bill number 1, clauses 4 and 5.
That's the Constitution.
Right, this is the Constitution Amendment Bill that is directly talking to the Tobago self-government, right, 2020. Let's look at that and what it says. Clauses 4 and 5, this is the preamble and equality of status. And just to clarify, what is happening is that you have the Constitution of Trinidad and Tobago that's already written. This particular proposal will be to insert a clause that deals specifically with Tobago.
Right.
So tell us a bit about
And I think what it basically does, if you look at clause 4 and 5, is saying that we as a government, we as a people, see it necessary to enshrine in our constitution that the people of Tobago deserve their right to have their right to self-determination, so that they could determine their political status and freely pursue their economic, social, and cultural development. And that is what we have been clamoring for years. So it just says it early in the Constitution. This is what it's about, and it should be enshrined in the Constitution.
I think us Tobagonians, we do need to be reminded that these things should be written in law.
Right.
You mentioned correctly what's happening in the THA now. It's a bit sad, but it is the reality. So many people just feel like this is supposed to happen because without truly understanding that the way for it to happen means that it must be in the Constitution.
And we must follow the law.
Right.
As right-thinking citizens, as leaders, as exemplars, we ought to ensure that no matter what you feel, because anybody could have all kinds of feelings, it's all based on, we should conduct our business responsibly according to what is enshrined in the law. I think it's important here to point out that this speaks of equality of status, that we are nobody's little sister or the ward of nobody. We are equal, so this speaks to equal status.
That's very important. And again, if you are looking at the survey, it requires you to go and read, you know, because the questions are Bill number 1, clauses 4 and 5, you know, so it means that you have to go and look to see what is happening. The MP is explaining some of the wording here, but obviously she can't explain all of the wording. And
I think if you take the time, let me tell you, people talk about this thing like it is this cumbersome piece of legislation. But I think that this document, or these two documents, break it down in a way that we could read and understand it well, that the average person could read and understand it well, or at least those who have been following. And we're going to continue to have the conversation to explain it and break it down to those who need further explanation. That's the reason we have a program like this.
Yeah. Yes? The thing about it is that when you're having fun, time flies.
Yes.
So that's an example of how to deal with the first part, because there are two parts. That's the constitutional amendment, where you actually have to look at the real constitution and you have to look at what the committee is proposing and see if the wording, if you agree with it, if you want to change it. There's completely agree, somewhat, very likely, not at all, and neutral. I think those are the 5 options.
Yes.
When you go in, right, so there are those options. But a lot of Tobagonians right now, I think, I may be wrong, they may be interested in the juicier part, which is the draft Tobago Island Administration Bill.
But before we jump there, I think that there are some parts of the Constitution I want to touch on really quickly, because I think it allows people to digest it a little better or easier, because I've looked at it in parts and broken it down into areas where people could, okay, if you're concerned about lawmaking powers, go here, look there. You know, so for the Constitution Bill, we could touch on the division of powers. That is clause 8, 11, and 13. And clause 8 speaks to the Tobago legislature and lawmaking powers, giving us the ability to make law for the matters under Schedule 4, giving us that exclusive right to do so. And then for Schedule 5, giving us exclusive administrative responsibility for the items under Schedule 5. And and it speaks to a closer relationship between the Tobago Executive Council, which is responsible for the control and the direction of of development in Tobago, to conduct its business or to liaise specifically with the president in accordance to as it relates to the matters under the fifth schedule. Now, we stay with division of power and we look at clauses 15, 16, and 17, which speaks to Tobago divisions of the Public Service Commission and the Teaching Service Commission. And I remember in the debate, in the consultation, some people were talking about having a separate teaching commission and a separate public service commission. But if we want to remain a unitary state and we want public servants in Tobago to have access to the opportunities in the public service in Trinidad and vice versa, we felt that it was important to keep one public service commission, but with a Tobago division that has responsibility for the assignments in Tobago. And this part of the legislation goes further into, just like the Prime Minister has to be consulted as it relates to some assignments in Trinidad for permanent secretaries and so on, the Premier in Tobago should be consulted for like chief administrator and administrators and so on in Tobago, so that gives some more power to us on this end.
With the Tobago division of the Public Service Commission, the Tobago division will now be responsible for the promotions and appointments and so on. You don't no longer have to say we're waiting on them Trinidadians.
Right, exactly. And the Tobago division would sit on the executive so to influence the national process.
The national policy.
So let's look some more at the Constitution. Clause 18 speaks to the unicameral legislature. I know at one point in time we were considering a bicameral legislature, and we consulted the United Nations Development Program and other consultants and people who have experience in this matter, and it was found that we are moving more towards a unicameral type of parliament throughout the world. It calls for, it allows a faster decision making. It is more economically, we'll be able to manage the finances or the expenses as it relates to a unicameral legislature. And this clause also speaks to the makeup or the composition of the legislature, having the 15 elected members as was recommended before, and having 5 majority councillors, 3 minority councillors, and 2 independents, or two appointed by the president according to her discretion, his or her discretion.
So just for clarity on this matter, the unicameral legislature, there was talk before about having 2 houses or so. That's the bicameral.
Yes.
And in this case, we're talking
We are
about
recommending,
just one legislature.
we're recommending one legislature.
Right. So you're not going to have those 2 houses in the Tobago Island government.
Right.
You're going to have one pretty much to what it is there.
Yeah, it would be 15, and then you're going to have another 11 members, because you have an increased amount of authority and items to cover, and later on you'll see the part that I like most, where we speak about the parliamentary oversight. You need people to be on the joint select committees, people to be on the public accounts committees for oversight to ensure transparency and accountability. And this introduces the independence. In our current assembly, we don't have independent councillors, so you have 5 councillors on the majority side, 3 proposed by or recommended by the minority side, and 2 by the president, and they would help in the work conducting
When I read it, I liked the 2 by the president.
Yes.
I mean, you can never really get fully independent people, but I liked the 2 by the president. So.
Right. Another interesting part of clause 18, it speaks to the office of the premier, office of the deputy premier, and the office of the secretary of legal affairs, which is like your attorney general in Tobago to treat with legal matters. Then you have the office of the minority leader. And what I like here is the strengthening of the powers of the office of the minority leader, that when the term ends or when the dissolution of the
Yes.
legislature happens, he doesn't have to vacate office. Just like the opposition leader doesn't have to vacate office immediately, he or she doesn't have to vacate office, and it gives more powers to the office of the minority leader under this clause. Then this speaks to a no confidence motion in the premier. So if there's a no confidence motion debated and passed in the assembly legislature, and the chief secretary or the premier has to vacate office, and it goes into explaining as to exactly how that would be done. And those are the major items under the Constitution bill, and then we get to the fun part that
But
you
it's
like.
the main thing, though. I think the main thing for people to understand, you actually have to read. You
have to read it.
You
You
have to
can't
go
get
and read
away.
it. You can't
get away from reading
answer the questions. You can't provide your opinion on the survey if you don't actually read it. It's easy language. That's one of the good things. It's fairly easy language. And there's some fun parts, so people get to say whether or not they agree. Many people will probably breathe a sigh of relief when they realize, okay, well, we have this proposal that the minority leader will still continue on, because these are things that the 6-6 tie, has caused people to consider. Now, like you said, we're going to jump to the
Island government
second bill. It's two bills. The draft Constitution Amendment Tobago Self-Government Bill 2020, and then there's companion legislation which is proposed, the draft Tobago Island Administration Bill. This is particularly fun to read, fun to read. There are some questions that is specific to the survey. Would you like to touch on a specific question in the survey, or you want to go straight to some of the fun parts?
Well, I think we could jump straight to some of the fun parts. Yeah, because in looking at the fun part, it would cover some of the questions in the survey in the interest of time.
Tobago allocation.
Tobago allocation. So that's jumping to clause 22 to 30. So the Tobago allocation, we're recommending a 6.8% allocation, a minimum of 6.8% and no upper limit. So this is based on the research that was done, looking at what was done at the Dispute Resolution Committee in the past, and looking at 6.8% as a lower limit
Was
or
the
minimum.
previous one 6.8 to 8?
It was 4.03 to 6.9%.
6.9.
Right?
Okay.
So this one says a minimum of 6.8%, and anything above that based on what is presented by the Fiscal Review Commission. And the Fiscal Review Commission is made up of the Minister of Finance, the Secretary of Finance, I think 2 members from the cabinet, a member from the Tobago Island government. So any of these matters they could speak to resolving dispute. They could look at if there is something taking place development-wise in Tobago, and look at the appropriate amount that is suited for Tobago's development during a set period and recommend the same. So it doesn't have to be 6.8%, it could be more based on what is taking place and the development agenda.
One of the concerns that several people have had is the idea of a percentage. Yes, it's difficult to go outside of a percentage based on what we've been accustomed to, but is that something that was deliberated by the committee? Did you guys consider maybe not a percentage, but something else? I don't know.
Well, we started with what was proposed to us. We look at what's being done in other parliaments and in other countries that have a similar situation, and we decided based on the research done in Tobago and the research done at the Ministry of Finance to stick with the percentage, because it gives you a level of predictability. In the past, when there wasn't a percentage, all kinds of crazy stuff happened, and we want that level of predictability and certainty as it relates to planning our development and pursuing our development agenda. So 6.8 is proposed as the minimum percentage, and it could be increased based on the what is proposed by the Fiscal Review Commission.
And we could jump straight into that because that's next.
Yes.
The Fiscal Review Commission. That's a good thing to see.
Yes.
I don't know how people will feel about that.
I think you would always have disputes and disagreements as to what the allocation should be and so on. So it's important that they meet at the level of the commission, trash that out and move forward swiftly. Yes?
And the proposed members of the Fiscal Review Commission.
The proposed members of the Fiscal Review Commission, if I can remember off the top of my head, the Minister of Finance, the Secretary of Finance, 2 members from the Cabinet and a member from the Tobago Island government. An important part of this process is upon receiving the allocation, you know the House of Assembly usually goes into a retreat and then they come back at a press conference and tell you how the money is going to be spent. What I like here is the introduction of the Tobago Appropriation Bill. That after the Parliament has announced the allocation, that the Assembly has 30 days to go back and say which heads get what part of the allocation, to look at their different heads, look at the expenditure and how they're going to spend it. And then they are required to go to the Tobago House of Assembly and debate it. So that bill that they take into the House of Assembly would be called the Tobago Appropriation Bill. Yeah, and then get back.
And this is similar to what happens at central government level.
Yeah, because you have to, and you have the benefit of the Standing Finance Committee.
Right.
What the Standing Finance Committee does is allow the members of the Parliament, or in this case the members of the Assembly, to investigate, to question, to dig into every line item, so that there is that greater level of transparency and accountability for all of Tobago to see.
So let me ask a Tobagonian kind of question. Right? The members, a chairman who shall be the minister with responsibility for finance or his or her alternate, deputy chairman who shall be the secretary with responsibility for finance and his alternate, 1 member appointed by the Tobago Executive Council, 2 members appointed by cabinet. And there's a second part of this that says the members of the commission appointed under subsection 1 above, in terms of qualifications, the law is specifying that these members should be qualified in, they should have 10 years, at least 10 years experience in law, management or business administration, finance or accounting, or economics. So 2 questions. Well, let me start with the second one first. Why was it important to qualify the kind of person that should be on the Fiscal Review Committee?
Because it takes a certain level of deliberation and study and research. You don't go and say, I want 10% because I want 10%. There has to be some research. There has to be some equation. There has to be some work done to determine how you got there. So you can't say, okay, I'm busy. Let me send my secretary of I don't know, or an assistant secretary who doesn't have the experience or have never dealt with the matter before. Then you're going to be wasting time on the commission.
Do you think that the pandemic caused you guys to really pay more attention to this? Because in the past, people felt like the government, there's always money to spend, including some of us who have been employed in the government before. So now that you really have to pay attention to the dollars and cents, it is boiled down to having the necessary experience?
No, I think that that has always been the situation. It takes political will to take these things seriously. And even in appointments to board and so on, you see the president being more stern as to making sure people have the necessary qualification and experience, because you're dealing with the country's business. You're dealing with people's lives and livelihood. And you ought to be qualified and experienced and mature enough to handle these matters. So it's up for debate, and it's up for people to submit their recommendations. So I look forward to see what Tobagonians are going to say about this. Yeah,
it'll definitely be interesting to see the responses. And my Tobagonian question, why the committee has to be chaired? I mean, it's kind of self-explanatory, but I'm putting you on the edge here. Why it has to be chaired by the Minister of Finance?
Because the Minister of Finance would then be responsible for taking the the final position to the parliament. Only a minister could take a position to parliament. Yeah. So he's the Minister of Finance. He's responsible for the financial welfare of the country. So he has to take the position back to the parliament. And if you look at 26.3, clause 26.3, it provides for the Tobago Appropriation Bill, the Standing Finance Committee that gives the members in the Tobago House that ability to dig in, to investigate, to have their say, you know. So it's a very thorough thing to consider. And it's one set depends on the other.
Forcing you now to pay attention to what the law actually is. Yeah. Again, I think that's the thing I noticed about this bill in the very cursory read that I've had to go through to answer some of those questions, is that many of us tend to believe that things should just happen without actually understanding that there's a legal process set out, so it can't go the other way. So even with the language, and that's why I asked that question, because somebody who isn't familiar with it will say, well, if it's a Tobago thing, why the minister in charge?
Right, right.
You know, so it's important to point out that the minister is the one, as he put it, who can actually take it forward.
Yeah, and we're still a unitary state.
Well,
yes?
Definitely.
Yes.
So we're going to back up a bit. Just to clarify, when you spoke about the members of the assembly, you said 26.
Right, the composition of the legislature. You have 15 elected assemblymen for the 15 electoral districts. You have 5 councillors proposed or recommended by the majority leader or the premier. You have 3 councillors recommended by the minority leader and 2 by the president, the 2 independents, right? And the 26th person is the president. Yeah? So the House of Assembly conducts its business directly with the president.
And again, all of this is here.
Yes.
You just have to read it. Yes. Right? So a lot of the information is there. So let's go to section...
Clause 14, 15, 16.
Yeah, appointments of...
That speaks about committees. And this part of the legislation is the part that I wouldn't say like the most, but I appreciate this being inserted in the legislation and in our new operation, because it provides for more oversight into the runnings of the assembly, the operation of the assembly, and how it spends money and so on. So first you have the Joint Select Committee, which allows for committees to be made up of members of the assembly from the leading party, the minority party, and the independents to deliberate on matters of the assembly. And then you have in clause 15 and 16 the creation of the public accounts committees, and that's just like we have in the parliament, where you could sit and look into the workings of each ministry or each division, and look into the workings and the spending of state enterprises. And those committees are headed by the opposition, or in this case, by the minority, holding the majority to account and allowing the public to see and to ask questions about what is taking place, so you can mark your progress and ensure that everybody's comfortable with the spending.
Right. One thing though, what is new here? Because currently the Public Accounts Committee is in fact headed by the minority. As a matter of fact, we've had some little bacchanal there where the PDP said that the PNM were not complying. Every time they tried to call a meeting, nobody was coming out. In this particular, but not this one, the one that was before, the former setting, it was the minority leader only because of the numbers. Right? So there was no other minority member there. And so the majority had, I suppose, the say. They didn't come out, they didn't comply. Does this allow for more?
But this is for when you have a house set up. Is the PDP calling itself the minority
No,
now?
no, that's what I'm saying. Previously. Because I actually remember there were some issues coming up that were being reported on. And the PDP, the minority leader, he was adamant that he tried and nobody came out.
Well, this now making it a part of the Constitution and the legislation, it now becomes the law and something that you have to do. And if you don't do it, then you're operating against the law, and you wouldn't want to have that.
Right.
Yes? So I'm glad that this is now a part of the Assembly Act, and we have joint select committees, PAC and a PAAC.
Yeah.
Yes?
Some of the things about this is that the language is a bit clearer as well. When we had 12-0 and now you have 6-6, there were some things that were up in the air. I am seeing from reading this that the provisions are being made to say, well, if none exists. So it says
Yes.
the minority leader, if any,
Yes.
taking into consideration the
Right.
possibilities that can happen. And then we can go to...
And we also, and this is not because of a result of the 6-6. What we are doing is giving more authority and autonomy to the Assembly and the legislature. And in calling it a Tobago Island government, we are mimicking what is done at the Parliament as much as possible. So the people of Tobago deserve the same level of investigating
Right.
and knowing what is taking place with its island government. Yes, so the same way you can call in a state enterprise and ask them questions and dig into their books and so on. We want the people of Tobago to be given the ability and the opportunity to do that so they could stay on top of their government too.
Right. And that's pretty important. So that's 16, Public Administration and Appropriations
And
Committee.
then the next major part is Clause 28, which speaks to borrowing, where the House of Assembly is being granted the ability to borrow for a number of matters. And then generally, the Minister of Finance has to grant permission, but consultation must be had with the Minister of Finance, and wherever he doesn't grant permission, he has to say why.
Right. One of the things, I suppose, in the negotiations, you get to find out the typical question many of us have been asking: who stands security for some of these loans if you're going to borrow?
So that is why there are some people saying, just give us the ability to borrow, and we don't want to have to ask, or we don't want to have to consult with the Minister of Finance at all. But if we remain in a unitary state and we're incurring debt, of course, we as Trinidad and Tobago have to know that we are in position to repay the debt. There are some multilateral organizations who would give you money knowing that you're not in a position to repay that debt, you know, and that puts you in a really unfortunate position. So it's important that we as responsible citizens of this unitary state of Trinidad and Tobago remain committed to ensuring that we maintain the best economic health for this generation and the generations to come. So it's important to have that kind of conversation going at that level also.
I suppose Clause 29, the one right after,
The ability to invest.
that helps.
Yes.
Because if you can invest, then you have revenue,
Exactly.
and therefore you can back up your own
Right.
credit, the credit that you're seeking.
Right. So, and that pretty much brings it to the end, because then you have Clause 30, and Clause 30 speaks to the financial rules. The other provisions are basically items that had existed before.
Right.
So I think we could bring the presentation to a close at this point in time. And anything else you feel like you may want to ask, it's fine. And I would just really want to encourage Tobagoanians to get on board and own this process, because we have spent the years, the countless hours. I remember going to Mason Hall School and leaving there in the night. We were told that, okay, the consultation would end at 6 or sometime thereabouts, and we left late, like 9, 10, 11 o'clock in the night. It was exciting for so many of us, especially young people on board, sitting amongst the Crystal Gift, the Easton Mackenzie, Deborah Moore McGinns, and people who had been at the forefront of the battle for so long. So this is ours to own, ours to protect, ours to preserve, and I really want to ensure that Tobagoanians, young and not so young, and everybody who also would have contributed to the consultations in the past and want to see us have more responsibility and more autonomy and authority over our business, to
Right.
participate in the process and to support the government and to support even the Joint Select Committee as we march boldly towards granting Tobago internal self-government. This is not a PNM thing or anybody else thing. This is a Tobago people thing, and it would redound to the benefit of Tobago's development and Trinidad and Tobago's development. Because if we are in a better economic, social, and political position, it could only redound to the benefit of the greater whole, Trinidad and Tobago also. So I'm excited about the work we have done on the new horizons that we are about to embark on as we move towards passing this legislation.
Well, we will see how the people will respond.
Yes.
It's a lot. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of reading. I think because it is what it is right now in terms of the climate and everything, a lot of people are interested in the politics. They can get daunted because when you start picking up these things to read, we're not the biggest read in society, but it is important, particularly because people have ideas about how things should happen. And unfortunately, a lot of us with the ideas do not actually understand the premise behind how things work. And this document gives you some insight into what happens. Understanding the Constitution, I mean, you don't need to go and recite the whole Constitution. If I didn't look at this, I don't think I would have known how our Constitution started. I looked at that like about 3 days ago and recognized, okay, this is how it starts. Interesting. You know, but reading through it has been helpful. Of course, there's some more studying to do, but for everybody who wants to jump in at a time like this, particularly the younger ones, those of us who don't have the context, we don't know what has happened before. There's a lot of work out that the JSC has done and that I suppose all of the government is doing. Share the links. Look at the videos, read the Constitution, read the draft bill, understand what it is, ask a question. You have your MP to the constituents of Tobago West. Your MP is trying to simplify it for you. Call the office, ask for communications officer, everybody call and ask them the questions that you need to ask. It is not the most exciting thing to do. You could be watching Netflix and chilling and so on, but just bear in mind, we don't want 10 years down the road we're going to argue about the same thing, because that is what has been happening.
I think it's important that you mentioned that because it's very easy to go out there and push to start this thing over. There could be people who say, well, I didn't get to say what I wanted to say before, and now I come to say what I want to say now. Or now that there is 6-6 and I recognize that certain part of this thing doesn't work out to my benefit, then I want to sway the process in a different direction. We have to remember that this is a process and a document of consensus. Every single body in Tobago would not agree on all the provisions.
Correct.
But we could get to the best position that we can possibly accomplish right now and continue to build. And continue to build. Development is a moving, living, breathing thing, and we continue to build. The important thing is for Tobagoans to own this process and let nobody encourage you to disregard the conversations that you have had in the past, the work that we have done, the many nights that all of us from different parts of the political divide, we sat, we had our discussions, we did our research, and we wanted this so bad over the years, and now we are at a place where we have actually sat down and done the work at the Joint Select Committee. This is the first time this piece of legislation has gotten this far, and we've had so many consultations. You have in some instances 42 meetings, 44 meetings, 24 meetings, 12 meetings throughout the length and breadth of Tobago and Trinidad. It would be really unfortunate for anybody to try to push us to start over the process, then we may never accomplish it. So we have to really embrace, acknowledge the work that has been done and recognize it's not perfect, but we could give it our best shot and get this internal self-government that we so greatly desire and deserve. So I encourage all of Tobago to to get on board. This is our thing. This is a Tobago people's piece of legislation. Any and everybody want to get up and claim the victory. The PNM would want to claim the victory. The opposition would want to claim the victory. But at the end of it all, it's a victory for all of us. We've all done the work, and I really look forward to seeing this piece of legislation pass. And may we do our part to encourage and get the support of the opposition and the independents so we could really sing a victory song in the end of it all. So here we go.
All right, so you heard the MP. We're going to sign out. This is Face to Face, a public education and awareness series with the Member of Parliament for Tobago West, Minister Shamfa Cudjoe. If you want more information, you want to comment, you want to share your questions, concerns, whatever, check out the social media pages. It is Shamfa Cudjoe, MP Tobago West. That's on Facebook, on Instagram and Twitter, Shamfa Cudjoe TT, and of course you can check out YouTube. That's Shamfa Cudjoe Tobago West MP. All right, so get involved in the discussion. It doesn't matter where you're from, really. Get involved, share your concerns, put your highlights out there. Remember, you're going to get the opportunity as well for the MP to be responding to some of the things that you put out there, some of the questions, some of the comments, some of the concerns in future episodes. My name is Glendora Lashley, and we're signing out. See you on the next episode.
Thank you. Thank you, Glendora. Thank you, Tobago. Thank you.